What is up, guys? It is your host, Daniel. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are talking about the interesting topic of cities that are deserving of NBA expansion teams. With there being rumors that the NBA is planning on expanding this offseason or the next, a lot of people have been talking about cities that are most deserving of these teams. We're going to be starting off the list with some of the more obvious ones, and as the list goes on, we will be going into the dark horses, as I call them. So starting off the list, and the one that is the most likely to get a team is Las Vegas. Las Vegas in recent years has been doing a lot of expanding into sports with a hockey team and then a football team, with the Golden Knights in hockey and then the Raiders in football. It's only natural to conclude that they are going to be looking into getting an NBA team. Um, Obviously, their economy can sustain it. There has been interest in that city for a basketball team for a long time. And another interesting angle that I feel like a lot of YouTube channels that I have personally been watching haven't really touched on is I personally know a lot of people who leave Vegas because they don't feel like they can start a family because of how one-sided the economy is and the entertainment is. It's very centered around adult entertainment. But with the expansions of different sports teams, it kind of gives you something to do with your kids, which I'm not sure if that's their intention. I think it's probably just they want to diversify in entertainment, regardless of if it's family friendly or not. But I do could see how that is an added bonus that if you are raising a kid in Las Vegas, you have something to do. You can take them to a basketball game, a football game. Um, and I think a baseball team makes a lot of sense too, because a lot of times baseball is considered the most family friendly sport. Because even if your kid has no idea what's going on, they're typically going to have fun. So the second one is going to be Seattle. So as we know, Seattle has used to have the Supersonics and they lost that team. And um, they have a very strong market. People in that city do miss that franchise. And even if you go to this day, you can go into gift shops and find Supersonic jerseys. And when you're walking around, you see people wearing Supersonics jerseys. And so it's a pretty obvious move if you're the NBA. Um, they clearly have a strong market and a strong will. Um, Third, um, I have Vancouver, Canada. We know that the NBA has expanded into Canada before with the Toronto Raptors. In fact, similar to Seattle, the Vancouver, the Memphis Grizzlies used to be in Vancouver. And so similar to Seattle, they lost their team. Um, However, I do think that they would be a great market to, um, and I think that they would welcome the Grizzlies back. In fact, I would prefer that the Grizzlies go back to Vancouver and then Memphis gets their own team, because the mascot of the Grizzlies, it doesn't make any sense in Memphis. It makes a lot of sense for Vancouver because they actually do have grizzly bears in British Columbia. Whereas in Memphis, it makes no sense. In fact, a lot of people that don't understand some of the mascots of the NBA, typically it's because they moved from the city where their mascot made sense, and now they're somewhere where it just doesn't make any sense. Like, for instance, the Lakers are not from LA, they are from Minnesota, where Minnesota is famous for having the most lakes of any state. And so that is why that name makes sense in Minnesota, but it doesn't make any sense in Los Angeles. However, the Lakers are way too a part of the LA culture for them to ever go back to Minneapolis. So they have the Timberwolves now, which the Timberwolves still makes a lot of sense for Minnesota. And so I'm not even mad at that. So maybe instead of the Grizzlies going back to Vancouver, maybe similar to the Timberwolves, the Vancouver team could have a mascot that matches equally as good as the Grizzlies would. I also think it would be very interesting to see potentially a Seattle Vancouver, or even a Seattle Portland rivalry form. And I think that's highly likely if if that's how that went. So moving on to our fourth entry on this list. I actually have a, this is where the dark horses start. This is an unpopular opinion. I've never heard anyone mention this city, but I personally think that it makes a lot of sense, and that is San Juan, Puerto Rico. I personally have visited San Juan, and the basketball culture there is phenomenal. Everyone loves basketball there. They are very talented basketball players in Puerto Rico. I think the move just makes sense. As well, it being a part of the U.S. as a territory, it makes, in my opinion, Puerto Rico makes even more sense than Toronto and Vancouver does. And so the fact that the NBA has expanded to Toronto and Vancouver, I say why not bring the NBA to Puerto Rico? I also think it would be very fun to see potentially a Miami Heat in Puerto Rico rivalry form. And then moving on to our fifth spot, and this one also I have not heard anyone mention, but I think it makes a lot of sense. That being Chicago. Now I know they already have the Bulls, and the Bulls are a huge part of Chicago culture, probably the most loved Chicago sports team. Whether it be the Cubs or the Bulls, I think you could make an argument that the Bulls is the most loved sports team in that city. However, New York has two basketball teams with the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. LA has two basketball teams with the Clippers and the Lakers. I think it makes only sense that Chicago also, and potentially even Houston or Dallas could be cities that could be considered for having two sports teams. But with Chicago being the third most populous city in the U.S., with a metro population of near 9 million people, even if the metro population was split in half, you still have 4.5 million people who are fans of this team, which is a lot larger of a population than other cities that, like that's more fans for this second team in Chicago than the Memphis Grizzlies or the Portland Trailblazers or even the Denver Nuggets. The metro population in Denver is under 2 million, I believe. It might be close to 2 million now. But still, it's not nearing anywhere 4.5 million passionate fans. Um, Also, Chicago was one of the greatest sports cities in the country. When you move your sports team there, the city gets behind them, even when they're losing. In fact, I mean, Chicago has some of the worst franchises with the White Sox and the Bears, and these fans just they are gluttons for punishment. They love their teams for the fact that these teams are in Chicago, no more nor less. So I do think that a franchise would make a lot of sense there. It would be also super fun to get an inner city rivalry, especially if these teams were in the same division. That could be really fun and really interesting. So yeah, moving on from there, we have our sixth spot. And then this is technically I wouldn't consider this a dark horse. In fact, I consider it a no-brainer. But it might be considered a dark horse for people that aren't familiar with the culture of the city. That being Louisville, Kentucky. Now, Louisville is a basketball city. They absolutely love their college basketball team. One of the best fan bases for a college basketball team of any city. And so a basketball team only makes sense there. Um, they have a modern arena and a supportive fan base, and so making them an NBA team, it just makes sense. And I know I didn't have a lot to say about them, but I think they kind of just speak for themselves. And so yeah, moving on to the seventh spot. I would say that Pittsburgh makes a lot of sense. In the same way that Chicago makes sense, or Philly makes sense, or New York makes sense, Pittsburgh is one of those cities that when they have a sports team, they get behind them and they have they have strong fans there. The Steelers, they're they have a great fan base. The Pirates have a great fan base, and the Penguins have a great fan base. So logically, I think it makes the most sense that they get an NBA team. I also would love to see a 76ers and Pittsburgh rivalry form. Um, so yeah, with that, that is all of the cities that I have on my list. There are some other ones out there that, could potentially be some great places, but I just didn't think that they make the list. Some of those honorable mentions would be like, I think Nashville could have a case, or San Diego could have a case, or one that I've heard is Mexico City. Mexico City being the largest city in North America, larger than New York and larger than Toronto. And so them having a market, it's not a problem. The fact that New York can support, I might be misquoted here, but I think they have 10 professional sports teams. They have two NBA, two NFL, two MLB. I mean, that's six right there. Same thing with LA. LA has, yeah, like close to eight teams. So, um, lots of sports teams in those markets, and they're much smaller cities than Mexico City. So, the fact that American sports haven't kind of migrated to Mexico to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, but yeah, so those are the NBA teams or the NBA cities that I think make a lot of sense, and that I personally would love to see one day all of them getting their own city, because I love the idea of a huge NBA, potentially 50 teams, 60 teams, something like that. I love that idea. Um, And so, yeah, those are the cities that make the most sense to me. And with that, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.